Let's dive into Chapter 9 of Wuthering Heights. This chapter is a roller coaster of suspense, love, and heartbreak, so buckle up. We begin right after the events of Chapter 8. Hindley is drunk and stumbles into the kitchen to find Nellie trying to hide young Hareton in a cupboard. In a shocking outburst, Hindley grabs Nellie by the skin of her neck and threatens her with a knife. He rages that Hareton deserves to be flayed alive for not running to welcome him home. The scene escalates when Hindley takes Hareton upstairs and dangles him over the banister, a moment that is both terrifying and symbolic of the destruction Hindley's actions bring to his family. Hindley hears a noise downstairs and inquires who it is. While Hindley is distracted, Hareton slips from Hindley's grasp. Heathcliff, ironically the man who has every reason to Hindley, catches the child. But here's the kicker. Heathcliff's face shows anguish. Nellie observes that Heathcliff didn't save Hareton out of love or concern, but out of reflex. And she suspects that if it had been dark, Heathcliff might have then smashed Hareton's skull on the steps to exact his revenge on Hindley. This moment perfectly captures Heathcliff's internal conflict. He is both a man shaped by bitterness and revenge, yet still tethered to his humanity. Hindley and Nellie argue, with Nellie declaring that everyone hates Hindley. Hindley drinks brandy and commands everyone to leave him alone. Heathcliff shares observations with Nellie regarding Hindley's health. It is a pity he cannot kill himself with drink. He's doing his very utmost, but his constitution defies him. Mr. Kenneth says he would wager his mare that he will outlive any man on this side of Gimmerton. This observation will be important later in the book. Nellie goes into the kitchen and thinks that Heathcliff went out to the stable, but realizes later that Heathcliff is sitting on a bench on the other side of a wall. Catherine enters and approaches the hearth and asks Nellie, "Where's Heathcliff?" Nellie says, "In the stable," and Heathcliff did not contradict her, perhaps because he had fallen asleep. Catherine exclaims that she is unhappy and asks if Nellie can keep a secret. Catherine reveals that Edgar proposed marriage earlier today. Catherine has accepted, but she is plagued by doubt. She keeps asking Nellie if she has made the right choice, clearly seeking reassurance. Nellie responds with a series of questions to help Catherine work it out on her own. It starts with, "Why do you love him?" Catherine's ambition comes out when she says that Edgar is handsome, and by marrying Edgar, she will be rich and the greatest woman of the neighborhood. Nellie says Edgar won't always be young and handsome, and possibly not always rich. Catherine says he is now, and she only has to worry about the present. Nellie asks, well, what then is the obstacle? Catherine proceeds to strike her forehead and her heart and says, "In whichever place the soul lives, in my soul and in my heart, I am convinced that I am wrong." Catherine then shares a dream that has stayed with her and has forever changed her ideas. Catherine dreamed that she was in heaven, but it did not seem to be her home. She cried and cried to come back to earth, so the angels flung her out onto the middle of the moors near Wuthering Heights. Catherine analyzes the significance of this dream by saying, "I have no more business to marry Edgar Linton than I have to be in heaven. And if the wicked man in there had not brought Heathcliff so low, I shouldn't have thought of it. It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now. So he shall never know how I love him. And that, not because he's handsome, Nellie, but because he's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same, and Linton's is as different as a moonbeam from lightning or frost from fire." During Catherine's speech, Nellie became aware of Heathcliff's presence. Heathcliff overhears part of her confession. He hears her say it would degrade her to marry him because Hindley had so reduced Heathcliff socially. But he doesn't stay to hear the rest, the part where she declares him her soulmate. Devastated, Heathcliff storms out into the night. Nellie notices but doesn't tell Catherine, who goes on to share her plan with Nellie. She will marry Edgar and use her new position to help raise Heathcliff out of his degradation. She could never forsake Heathcliff, and Edgar will just have to deal with it. Catherine then meditates on the nature of existence and says, "What were the use of my creation if I were entirely contained here? My love for Linton is like the foliage in the woods. Time will change it, I'm well aware, as winter changes the trees. My love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of little visible delight, but necessary. Nellie, I am Heathcliff. He's always, always in my mind, not as a pleasure, any more than I am a pleasure to myself, but as my own being." Catherine's comparison of her love for Edgar and Heathcliff is significant in understanding her divided self. She likens her love for Edgar to the foliage in the woods, something beautiful but transient, subject to change with the seasons. This reflects her pragmatic and socially driven decision to marry Edgar. He represents security, refinement, and a connection to the world of social respectability. However, Catherine acknowledges that this love is superficial, incapable of withstanding time's inevitable changes. In contrast, Catherine describes her love for Heathcliff as resembling the eternal rocks beneath, a foundation that is unseen, rugged, and unchanging. This love is not about fleeting joy, but about necessity. Heathcliff is essential to her very being. Her declaration, "I am Heathcliff," transcends the traditional notion of romantic love, suggesting a bond so intrinsic that it blurs the lines between their identities. Catherine and Heathcliff are not simply lovers, but mirrors of one another, bound by shared origins, emotions, and experiences. Their connection is elemental, tied to the moors and the wild, untamed spirit of Wuthering Heights itself. By describing Heathcliff as always in my mind, not as a pleasure, but as my own being, Catherine recognizes that Heathcliff is not merely a part of her life, he is her life. Rejecting him would be rejecting herself. Joseph's entrance concludes Nellie and Catherine's conversation. After supper is cooked, Joseph is looking for Heathcliff. It is now that Nellie whispers to Catherine that Heathcliff had overheard a good part of her conversation earlier. Catherine rushes out looking for Heathcliff. After she can't find him, she convinces Joseph to go down the road and search for him. Joseph returns empty-handed. It is a very dark night, and a great storm sweeps through. Catherine keeps walking outside from the door to the gate, waiting for Heathcliff. The storm is so violent that a tree branch falls on the roof and knocks down a portion of one of the chimneys. Catherine comes in, thoroughly drenched, and sits by the fireplace all night. The violent weather mirrors Catherine's emotional state, chaotic, unrelenting, and destructive. The physical damage caused by the storm foreshadows the greater destruction Catherine's choices will wreak on both Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange. Just as the storm disrupts the physical structure of the house, Catherine's internal chaos will destabilize the relationships and power dynamics that define the lives of everyone around her. Nellie enters in the morning, and Catherine's teeth are chattering. Hindley is annoyed at Catherine's sickness and asks what prompted her to be out in the rain. Joseph snitches and tells the reason. Catherine's behavior becomes so erratic that Kenneth, the doctor, is summoned. Kenneth says Catherine is dangerously ill and has a fever. Mrs. Linton insists that Catherine goes to Thrushcross Grange to convalesce. This would prove to be an unwise choice, as both Mr. and Mrs. Linton took the fever and died within a few days of each other. Catherine returns to Wuthering Heights more passionate and saucier than ever. Heathcliff had not been heard of again since that night. Catherine refuses to talk to Joseph and Nellie after Nellie blames Catherine for Heathcliff's disappearance. Kenneth says everyone should just do whatever Catherine wants in order to maintain her health. Kenneth's diagnosis of Catherine's illness reflects Victorian beliefs that emotional distress could lead to physical ailments. By advising everyone to appease Catherine's wishes, Kenneth acknowledges the fragile dynamics at Wuthering Heights and the toll of her internal conflict. His intervention foreshadows Catherine's tragic decline and highlights how suppressed desires in emotional chaos drive the broader cycle of destruction in the novel. Hindley obliges because he knows that Catherine's marriage with Edgar will bring honor to the family. 3 years pass, and the chapter concludes with Catherine's marriage to Edgar. Nellie moves with Catherine to Thrushcross Grange, leaving behind young Hareton, who is now 5, and who will now have to fend for himself under Hindley's neglectful and abusive care. This decision, like so many others in this chapter, will have ripple effects throughout the rest of the story. What do you think of Catherine's decision? Was it ambition, desperation, or both? And how will Heathcliff's absence shape what is to come next? If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button, and I will catch you in the next one.